Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly, and voila! You get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. And like always, I try and find you some of the most fascinating topics from the most fascinating people. My guests today are two that we've had on previously and that we love having them on again. Dino Zincarini from Turetsky Consulting. Hello, Dino.
Hello there.
And Ian Cook from Visier. Hello, Ian.
Hey, David. Hey, Dino.
So, Ian, today, instead of asking you about something new that no one else knows about you, because I think we know a lot about you, I think we're just going to dive into the topic. How about that?
Sounds good.
Okay. So, Ian, today we decided to talk about some really fascinating issues that have come up recently because of some new developments that have passed the news in the last week or so. And the topic is, are job titles dead? Long live job titles. And we're going to talk about the history of job titles. We're going to talk about the applicability of job titles and what's changed and why are we talking about it. So our first question is, job titles have been around forever in the world of human resources and human resource systems. And the job table has not gotten a lot thinner over time. In fact, it's actually gotten a lot fatter because we just keep adding jobs to the job table as things progress. And it seems like we never audit the job table. So why? What is the problem with the job table and why are we talking about it?
Let me jump in and just share something that we see a lot in terms of as people load up their data to try and understand things. Within our application, we have a career path. It's a graphing process that runs over the data, uses job name to try and build out like who moved from what to where. When you show it in a demo, it looks nice, clean, it's clear, like it really is good. Instantly, when we've shown it to prospects, they go, oh yeah, but our jobs are a mess. And what they mean by a mess is they'll have one role, like one thing that is done with 4 or 5 different names. And that may be because they've grown by acquisition and they never harmonized. It may be that there's certain populations that are special flowers, so they've been given vanity names. It may be that, you name it. Like I have a personal story where I worked in a 2,400 person organization. We had 1,200 job titles. And that was, existent, like current, inactive, like forget history. It was probably even worse, but that was, real time. I'm sure you guys have got similar cases where it's like the titling just goes crazy and people don't think about the repercussions of that.
Oh, sure. I worked at a financial services company and we had 18,000 people and we had 100,000 jobs. And it was, like you said, it was based on the fact that as we grew and as our company evolved, the jobs evolved along with it, and then also the need to specialize. So while you may have started out with managing director as being the job title, it sort of needed to then get specified and kept growing and growing until you went from managing director to senior managing director. And then you had to find out, well, what's junior about that managing director? So you needed to add managing director 1, 2, and 3 to it. And none of those titles were ever retired. They all stayed in the system.
And what do you guys think? Because there's also, I think, a modern twist to all of this, which is that job titles started out as a function of the hierarchy. That is something corporations created and controlled. But in the modern job market, job titles have morphed into a personal branding exercise. That's why we have chief fun officers and the like now. And so in reality, I think what's going on here is we're trying to solve 2 problems with one thing. The organization wants to standardize, organize, and plan. And that requires a fairly minimal set, a language, if you will, something it can work with. Whereas the business and the individuals who work in the business are trying to distinguish themselves, trying to create something innovative and new. These two forces are working against each other. And this is where we get this tug of war, where you have HR, the forces of control, perhaps trying to say, no, we need to restrict. And then you have the business saying, no, we're going to give titles based on the changing reality of the work. And that's a real problem.
Well, it also doesn't help. You have so many cooks in the kitchen as well. We have recruiters who create job titles based on specifications they get from managers. And then as they look into the marketplace to try and hire those people, they find that they need to be very specific about certain things and be very generic about others. And it impacts the expectation about what the person's going to be called when they come on board. So there's the proliferation there.
And I also think it impacts what the kinds of people that they then go and look at to work at to hire, which then impacts the kinds of costs that those people accrue. Like, I've had long internal conversations around, so what is this job and where does it fit and how's it leveled and what's it like? And like, should I look at this person? But you said the price was this and this person's paid this already. Like, as you say, Dino, that interest to give people a sense of uniqueness through title or through a new job you're adding then really clashes with the harmonization of an architecture of jobs that need to have some way of being compared internally. We definitely see organizations struggling to square that circle a lot. And it impacts analysts, it impacts planning, it can impact mark to market, impact talent acquisition. It's a really pervasive problem.
The more we try to use data, the more we want to standardize it. And yet the more we want to have things proliferate, the more it becomes differentiated. And I think that the hard thing here is there's no one right answer. If you're in a workforce planning role, like I've been in the past, yeah, you want to try to lock this down a bit. But if you're a worker, as I also am, I'm the one who I'll claim guilt here. I'm the one who's pushed for cool, interesting job titles, as David knows, because he hired me once upon a time and had to give me one of those titles. And so, I'm a hypocrite in a way, right? So It's normal. There's no one right answer here. And that's, I think, why we have a challenge is it all depends on what you're trying to do defines what position you take.
Yeah, well said.
I think one of the outcomes we have to think about as well, because you both talked about this, is the standardization and what does standardization really mean when it comes to job titling. I think it has to do more with what's the job content and what are the skills necessary and what are the responsibilities and the duties necessary. You talked about the element of hierarchy here. When I was back in the compensation world and we used to do job evaluation on these jobs, it wasn't the title we evaluated. It was all of the pieces of the job that mattered. And so we didn't just look at the title, although the title had to be a component of the job evaluation because it had to fit. You couldn't call somebody a chief operating officer if they're really a supervisor. There had to be some kind of semblance of normalcy there. And so when you think about standardization, you think about the chief as being ahead of something. And so there had to be that kind of thought process around it. And the job documentation around titles is about what is it this thing is supposed to do, what its impact to the organization, what kind of skills are necessary, what kind of know-how do you have to have, what kind of accountability. I'm going back to the old heydays of know-how, accountability and skills. But it's really true. You have to think about what are the core components of a job and then allow that to be the description of the job that then pushes the title.
For sure. As you were describing that, Dave, you're triggering something else that I think is happening in the current frame where the boundaries around a job are becoming much more fluid. So back in the heydays, your job was your job, your hierarchy was much more clean and strict. Right. Whereas that's still true to an extent, but it's more like the core of the job is stable, whereas the periphery of the job is increasingly fluid, which I think just lends even more challenge to that. How do we square this circle of like, I need to know that I'm comparing like with like, and I need to recognize the special nature of everybody.
And to build on that, I think, there's a lot of companies who view that as part of their culture. I worked with one where, we were trying to build a workforce planning function, which requires you to be able to say, this is a job today and this is what it's going to be tomorrow. The common denominator here is job title. And yet they had, of 15,000 active employees, about 13,000 unique jobs. So almost everybody has their own title. That makes it almost impossible to do this exercise. And yet they also embrace that power for hiring managers and employees to work out what everyone should be called, that dynamic nature to change and morph with the organization. That is part of their culture. They're not going to change that. So, imposing some centralized doctrine for this is not going to work for everybody. And therefore, what do you all think we can do in this world where we may not be able to enforce one approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think there is a return to the past of like, thou shalt. We got to find a new way to do this stuff.
Right. I agree.
So let's go to what could be the next question and an evolution from what you were talking about, Dino, which is what's changed to make there some kind of new issue here, or why are we talking about this? What's the new development? What's the new opportunity that we have in order to look at job titles a little bit differently?
What happens when employees behave badly? Boy, we could do an entire TV show, maybe a Netflix special on that. Well, Ryan and I sat down and recorded episodes for FAMA, and we asked practitioners, give us your most outrageous story. The sales leader that brings cocaine to work, whatever. Just bring us the outrageous, and it is funny. So if you need a laugh, which we all do from time to time, search for workplace misconduct wherever you get your podcast, and you'll find it. And trust me, you will laugh and cry, but you'll definitely laugh. All right. Thank you.
So I'll speak to the thing that triggered our connection, Dave. It's like there's a group called MZ who have been in the labor market world for a really long time. In order to work in that world, you have to do job standardization. You have to look at across the web, like what are the thousands of jobs that are out there? You need to build some means of harmonizing and making those common. If they've been at it for a long time, they basically opened up their job title normalization approach. So it's now open source. There is an API you can go hit. You can fire off your jobs. They will fire you back the standardization. So that whole process we've talked about that you described through Hey, or sometimes done by consultants, where we take all the unique namings, but we look at other attributes and other components of the job. You can now augment and like potentially enrich the data you have, not get rid of your job title, but actually augment the data you have with the standard occupation from MZ. So, the 5 names you have for quality assurance or customer success all get banded by this. This is the MZ equivalent. It's always going to be approximation, but as long as there's 80-90% overlap, even a 70% overlap, that's better than nothing. So they've now open sourced that. ONET has been around for a really long time. That's about 2,000 titles. MZ is 75,000 titles. So we're getting a big enough ontology to start actually having the differentiation within the population that will help an employer.
Yeah, I like where you're going with this, because if I can paraphrase, we're taking what used to be a compliance problem and what some companies are still treating as a compliance problem and turning it into a data processing problem. Well, data processing problem, we can solve with technology. That's what databases and computers are for, right? Who cares if we have a longer piece of information that describes what somebody is, one of it being a job title that they may use on LinkedIn and another being a standard skill or function-based designation that we use only internally in the company. It's okay. We can manage that data with technology.
Yeah.
As long as there's a way we can then tie back to both of your points, tie back to the compliance issue that gives us an ability to submit, if you're an employer that has to submit the appropriate records to the Department of Labor in order to be able to fulfill on whatever compliance issue. For example, doing the Department of Labor, they have different things you need to submit throughout the year. As long as you can do that, and maybe even the MZ tool might help you with that, then you're good. But you need to tie back to the ONET descriptions in order to be compliant.
But that's what I think the opportunity is. Like, as a compliance piece, there's the job architecture piece. Like traditionally, and to Dino's point, technology is now stepping into the frame. Traditionally, organizations that I've seen, they would get to the point where they just couldn't cope with their job architecture anymore. It's like it's too messy, it's too complex.
Right.
We're spending hours on compliance. Typical response would be, okay, let's get a consulting gig in. Let's spend time looking at it all, normalizing it, coming up with new names. Like let's re-level, reorganize, re-standardize, lock. And so, let's say once every 3 years that would happen, and then you'd get your whole new raft of job names that are all clean, tidy, well organized. And then the degradation of that would start to happen again.
Sure.
What you get with the technology is actually 70% of that work is done by the technology. And it is like MZ is standardized to ONET, which then gets standardized out. So you keep these things in sync. It actually simplifies a lot of that compliance because it's being looked after automatically for you by technology.
And by the way, the consulting firms that do that kind of work, like Turetsky Consulting LLC, we're still here to help. If you can't do that 30% yourself, we're there to help you. But there are also paid solutions that can help you not only take you to the end of being able to match your jobs to a standard taxonomy, but also then to match you against market data, which gives you an opportunity to see, how are we competitively paying? And so companies like salary.com have been doing this for many years and have developed a very good taxonomy. And I imagine that MZ tool can be used to also get you to the match, or can be used to get you to a standardized title, which then can get matched. But there is that need. And I think the reason why you brought up, which is great, is MZ now, and there are tools in the market that now have APIs for us to develop against, where there is no excuse to not trying to standardize. It's there. And now with the open source MZ, it's there ready for you to be able to consume. Why wouldn't you do it?
I think some people would maybe lack some of the technical expertise. Again, another opportunity for Turetsky Consulting is like, okay, like
there you go.
Like, how do I hit the API? What do I do with the data coming back? Where do I put it? There's some solid, just sort of data handling things where folks like us, it's like, okay, we get it. Like, not everybody in an HR organization is going to have that comfort level with passing the data back and forth. But the value of that standardization is huge. I mean, we talked a little bit about this notion of a garage. It's like garage is where you put all your messy stuff. It's like, oh yeah, well, deal with that later. And again, classic, you get it to the point where you can't get in the door anymore, then you bring in the folk to tidy it up. Like now, done well, this is sort of your garage is kept clean for you through support from people who know how to leverage the technology and the technology being openly available. So
hey, after the podcast, you need to tell me who can actually help me clean up my garage. So
is this one of those situations where you can truly have it all? Is that what you guys are saying? That you can let the business and employees brand and market work the way they think is right, while HR, finance, and other groups can have the standardization that allows them to do their planning, their organizing the way they want?
I see it that way because I don't think this isn't a replace your job title. Like, again, the way this would have been potentially approached in the past is you came in, you standardized, like that was the published job title. You tried to keep everybody on it. Now we're in a world where why not run both? Like I've got my job name, job title, whatever you want to call it, that is mine, that goes on my email signature. It's my brand that I carry around. There's no reason why elsewhere in my job table I haven't got my standard occupation name, which is what we use for analysis and planning on, like, okay, this is the category of workers, people that you fit into.
Right.
I don't think it's an or, I think it's an and now. And it's become easier to manage that and.
And I think the HRMSs that exist today and the ERPs all have a place for an internal and external title. So there really isn't an excuse of, well, I don't have a place to store it. And what's hysterical about this is now we're also proliferating more titles because we're now going to have yet another title on the architecture, on the job table, that we're going to need to track and we're going to need to maintain over time. And so, to Ian, to your point before, they still need some consulting expertise to come in and trim out some of those old titles so they can make room for the new ones.
Oh, for sure.
Because we are going to be adding some rows. We're definitely going to be adding some rows to that job table.
And equally importantly, I think because this type of data has been so quote unquote dirty in the past and difficult to keep static. Because every few years, somebody goes in and changes everything, it meant that this data didn't get used very strategically. It's used for recruiting perhaps, but is anybody really doing effective workforce planning? Is anyone doing skills-based analysis? Well, no, because we don't have the data to do it. If we can separate these two worlds and say, okay, the business, name things the way you want, and HR and finance, standardize the way you want, well, that means this data becomes usable. We can put it to work for us, and we can do some pretty cool stuff with it.
No, for sure.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by Turetsky Consulting and listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
And so, Dino, I think that moves us to the next question, which is, do we even now still need job titles? Or is there a way for us to describe those clusters of skills that get us to basically recognize that people aren't just doing one job anymore?
I personally think there'll always be room for a job title because I view it more and more, I think a lot of people do, as a brand, right? Career used to be something your employer owned. You worked at one place for a long time and that was that. I think everyone acknowledges that career is now something you craft and create through a lifetime of experience. And as a result, employees are taking ownership of that branding. And the core branding is job title. There's always going to be a need to brand your work in a way that's relevant for the market at the time that you're working. And therefore, it's not going to go away. But I think what we mean by it and what's behind it is evolving. It's no longer just a simplistic title. What we're talking about here is saying that there is a brand for your job, but the job itself can also have a categorization or a taxonomy that is standardized. And we can even break it down into a more molecular level. If we get into skills-based analysis and tracking skills, then there's a whole set of stuff below job title that floats around and can be managed. So it gets pretty interesting what we can do with it once we start to separate what we're really talking about.
Yeah, I'm with Dino. I don't see titles disappearing. I can see them evolving to be more descriptive on the personal level. But if you think about the challenge of analytics, like you need a easy, clear way to understand populations that are like populations. And I love the focus on skills. I really support what Dino is saying about, let's not look at a person just as their title and assume that because they have that title, they can do these things. Let's look at the person as the combination of capabilities, how those assemble, how those are used. But when it comes to hiring, comp, adjacency, all of those things, like we're going to need the shorthand of a categorization of what those things, when they're put together, what type of work is that individual capable of? What stream of work are they in?
Right.
And if we don't want these sort of, long hyphenated strings of descriptions like executive, product, whatever, then we are going to keep using titling. But I think having that break between, here it is standardized and understood versus here it is in a descriptive explanation of the person just keeps that open as an approach.
I think one of the other, there are two things that I want to bring up on that though, Ian, which is that position management certainly changes the game a little bit because there could be different jobs involved inside of what people do. So in the second part of that is think about a nurse who goes and spends one of her shifts as an RN, and then the next part of her shift, she's the shift supervisor. And so she's paid at two different rates.
Yeah.
And she has two different titles. In one, she's a supervisor, and the other one, she's a registered nurse. And therefore, there's two different pays, there's two different authorities. And so as that person is existing in that healthcare organization, they have to be known as something else. And so position management enables those two things to exist simultaneously, splitting that person's record for the time period that they are acting as one or another, and doesn't make them fall into one or the other. But the question then is kind of the next thing on my mind is, so what do you actually call that person? What is their job? Is it a part-time supervisor and a part-time RN?
I think they're a nurse, and your job is when you're acting and using your skills. So again, I think that's sometimes what people misunderstand is like the job is the position. It's the thing you inherit to do the work. I think it's a great example. We actually have customers who have that exact situation, and they end up they don't have two individual records for the person. They have a record for the person. They have separate records for their assignments. So I'm a nurse that is assigned to RN. I'm a nurse who's assigned to, nurse leader or ER or whatever that might be. And so but I think it's important, David, because that is where we're going. Like we're going to be each of us doing multiple jobs potentially. So you may have a primary and a periphery. So this notion of like single titling is probably going away, more so in something like healthcare than other roles. But the need to be able to separate the person from the work they're doing and understanding that, I think is an important step and likely to hit more employers than just healthcare.
Oh, sure. And the skills necessary to do both of those assignments, they're going to be different. There may be training needs against those assignments. And the rudimentary job title does not make sense when you're trying to train an RN for supervisory type training. You need to make sure that you're going down to the grassroots of the skill necessary or skill improvement necessary and be able to leverage that data to be able to say, and this person needs to be enrolled in that training for that skill. And then be able to actually pay them for the skills. And then you get into skill-based pay, which is probably a topic for another day, but it's the evolution of being able to recognize that people aren't doing a unidimensional thing. Yeah. They're doing multiple dimensions.
I think that goes back to a point that Dino was making around planning. Like, why is a standard occupation name not going away? Like, if we just take your healthcare example, the need to plan for a person to fulfill that shift with that capability at that point in time is not going away.
Right.
And we already do this, right? We do this in finance with cost centers. Cost centers are created partially to avoid reorgs. You can reorg the organization as much as you want. That doesn't change the way cost centers work. So finance has a standardized way of rolling up costs and looking at the business. We can do something similar.
Yeah, and they need that same standardized way of costing and appropriately understanding, if I add more of these, what might that cost me? So all of that aspect is I don't see that going away at any time.
So practically speaking, though, what can people do to prepare for this? Is there something other than hitting the MZ API? Is there anything they can do to prepare themselves to get ready to change their job titles to be more fluid and to allow the organization to really be a living, breathing thing rather than being so, stuck on a title structure?
Well, I think you provided really good advice right up front, David, that actually thinking about them as separate things, not having to try and wedge the two challenges that Dino highlighted into a single job title. Let's have something that we call what this is that the business uses and people stick on their email. Let's have another thing, which is standard approach or kind of core structure, our more rigid, common style. So let's get ready to actually run those two things inside our transactional systems, our HRS. Let's understand what that would take for us to do it. Like, who needs to be involved? How do we build alignment around that? Like, understanding, like, if we try and force both things into a single label, we're going to fail at one or the other. And recognizing that's been going on for some time.
Oh, it sure has. I think it also might ask us to redefine, what does the word promotion mean? What is a job change? If it just means a change in title without real meaning behind it, then maybe it is just a job title change, which are easy to code in HRMS today. But the word promotion we should probably take a long look at that and recognize skill development, recognize emotional and emotional maturity and professional maturity and a lot of other things, which I think have always been kind of assumed that people had as just coming to work, whether you're 18 or 85. And it's definitely not true. And maybe the word promotion and maybe the structure of those transactions need to be really heavily examined.
I think that's a good point. We spend a lot of time trying to find like the single rule across all businesses that meant a promotion was a promotion. we haven't found it. Like the way we handle that analytically is people send us an event record that says this is, because in some instances a pay change was, in other instances it wasn't. In some teams a job name change it was, in another instance it wasn't. Like there was no one thing, and there wasn't even a cluster of things that meant this is, this isn't. So, you know, that may be one thing that really helps with the standard occupations. It's hierarchical, so you know this one to this one drives promotion, but those things do go hand in hand, and sort of understanding how does your business recognize promotion is a great place to start.
We used to create these rules that said, if it's not a 1 grade or 2 grade jump, then it's not a promotion. If you didn't change the impact of the organization, then it's not a promotion. And I actually think, especially with career ladders and looking at alternative hierarchy strategies, I think that also helps looking at what is the real word promotion mean, because it actually means something socially. I mean, you go home and you say to your family, hey, I got promoted today. It really means something. And the organizations have gotten really tight on hierarchy. They've gotten really tight on people having things to celebrate. And that was one thing culturally. I'm sure you guys saw it too, but as growing up as a child, when your parent got to come home and say, I got promoted, that was a thing to celebrate. And we haven't seen a lot of that lately.
No, for sure. I think it's become harder because the notion of, self-management, so fewer managers, like as the focus on promotion has got higher, so the hierarchy has got flatter. So the opportunity to actually move what is technically up becomes less, but that doesn't mean that you're not advancing. I think that is a really, this whole job architecture conversation that opens up can we make it, does it have to be promotion, or can we just make it progression?
Right. Is there evolution is going to be continuous? There's always going to be evolution, and we should enable that and allow it to happen organically. And, promotion, maybe that we, like you said, David, we're expanding what that means to encompass evolution, and, compensation is a different story. We all know that. It used to be that a promotion meant you got more money. Now you might just get a title.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And does that mean we're talking about the same thing, or are we talking about something else now?
It was actually what drove, in one of the businesses, it was what drove the crazy proliferation of titles was, they kind of had manager and then they had director, and then all these people were pressuring for directors, so they became junior director, and then they became assistant junior director, and that was just so that somebody could feel like they had a promotion. So, there's 4 different gradations of the director role. Is that a material shift? Is it a manager plus, or is it associate, senior, whatever? So I do think thinking about the job structure and architecture without thinking about this notion of progression and how does that get reflected would be hard. And that's another thing people can do to prepare.
And one of the things you just mentioned there, people had a feeling when they heard a word. When you hear the word vice president or you hear the word director, it evokes something in you. There is something in the back of your head that says, being a vice president is a big deal. Being a president is a big deal. Being a director is a big deal. They're not sure about where it fits, but they kind of get that manager and then director and then vice president and then president. And when you move between organizations and talk about standardizing, but when you talk about different organizations having different meanings for what those mean, and therefore those labels come with compensation and they come with responsibility. I literally had somebody in my previous organization who said to me, I've always wanted to be a vice president. I've never been able to do it. And you're putting things in my way. You're being a blocker for me to become a vice president. When I wanted to do nothing other than make them successful and get them to the next level. But there were blockages in my way of ever promoting people to get there because I was one, and you had rules that say you couldn't have a vice president reporting to a vice president.
Yeah.
So what does it really mean?
Yeah.
And so hopefully with MZ and with these other things that are trying to make titles more standardized across organizations, we get to some more societal meaning. Hopefully this is an outcome that we get to some more societal meaning for what do those titles really mean? What do those levels really mean? And have more clarity. So there isn't that kind of feeling of I'm missing something for not being there.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've talked about titles and how they are living, breathing things that we need to maintain. And the job table is a really important part of that. And there are some reasons why we really do need to talk about titles, whether it's for analytics or for planning. And we need to make sure that they have some sort of relevancy to what people actually do. And then we talked about the reasons why we should investigate this now. And Ian brought up how MZ is open sourcing and making it easier for companies to now look at their titles and to standardize them. And then we talked about, do we actually even still need the concept of a title? And we say we do, but maybe it should change to being a recognition of the kind of skills and the kind of duties that people really do, and have them be a cluster of skills, and maybe even have two different titles, one for external use and one for internal use. Gentlemen, is there anything else you wanted to end with?
I think you captured it beautifully, David. I think it's an important area to reflect on as organizations start to transition with the reskilling, that thinking about getting ready to do this or the opportunity to do this will bring real serious benefits to folks moving forward.
And that, these forces are accelerating, not decelerating. And so the faster you think about it, come up with a plan and a strategy, and maybe even the technology to support this divergence between the branding of jobs and the standardization and use of the taxonomy for jobs, the sooner you can come up with a plan on how you're going to manage that, the better.
Perfectly said, Dino. Dino, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Ian, thank you very much again.
You're welcome.
And thank you for listening. And we appreciate you listening to the HR Data Labs podcast. If you like what you heard, please hit subscribe. And if you have friends that might find that useful, please send it their way. And as always, if you have any feedback, please come over to turetskyconsulting.com/podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you very much. Take care and stay safe.
That was HR Data Labs. Please visit turetskyconsulting.com/podcast to review the show, add comments about this episode, or add new ideas about upcoming shows you'd like to hear. Feel free to be creative, but please be nice. Thank you for joining us this week on the HR Data Labs podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.